King by Oscar Wilde. It was the night before the day fixed for his coronation, and the young king was sitting alone in his beautiful chamber. His courtiers had all taken their leave of him, bowing their heads to the ground according to the ceremonious usage of the day, and had retired to the great hall of the palace to receive a few last lessons from the professor of etiquette, there being some of them who had still natural manners, which in a courtier is, I need hardly say, a very grave offence. The lad, for he was only a lad, being but 16 years of age, was not sorry at their departure, and had flung himself back with a deep sigh of relief on the soft cushions of his embroidered couch, lying there wild-eyed and open-mouthed, like a brown woodland fawn, or some young animal of the forest newly snared by the hunters. And indeed it was the hunters who had found him, coming upon him almost by chance, as bare-limbed and pipe in hand he was following the clock of the poor goatherd who had brought him up, and whose son he had always fancied himself to be, the child of the old king's only daughter by a secret marriage, with one much beneath her in station, a stranger, some said, who by the wonderful magic of his lute-playing had made the young princess love him, while others spoke of an artist from Rimini, to whom the princess had shown much, perhaps too much honor, and who had suddenly disappeared from the city, leaving his work in the cathedral unfinished. He had been, when but a week old, stolen away from his mother's side as she slept, and given into the charge of a common peasant and his wife, who were without children of their own and lived in a remote part of the forest, more than a day's ride from the town. Grief or the plague, as the court physician stated, or as some suggested, a swift Italian poison administered in a cup of spiced wine, slew within an hour of her waking the white girl who had given him birth, and as the trusty messenger who bare the child across his saddle-bow stooped from his weary horse and knocked at the rude door of the goatherd's hut, the body of the princess was being lowered into an open grave that had been dug in a deserted churchyard beyond the city gates, a grave where it was said that another body was also lying, that of a young man of marvelous and foreign beauty, whose hands were tied behind him with a knotted cord, and whose breast was stabbed with many red wounds. Such at least was the story that men whispered to each other. Certain it was that the old king, when on his deathbed, whether moved by remorse for his great sin, or merely desiring that the kingdom should not pass away from his line, had had the lad sent for, and in the presence of the council had acknowledged him as his heir. And it seems that from the very first moment of his recognition he had shown signs of that strange passion for beauty that was destined to have so great an influence over his life. Those who accompanied him to the suite of the rooms set apart for his service often spoke of the cry of pleasure that broke from his lips when he saw the delicate raiment and rich jewels that had been prepared for him, and of the almost fierce joy with which he flung aside his rough leathern tunic and coarse sheepskin cloak. He missed indeed at times the freedom of the forest life, and was always apt to chafe at the tedious court ceremonies that occupied so much of each day, but the wonderful palace joyeuse, as they called it, of which he now found himself lord, seemed to him to be a new world of fresh fashion for his delight, and as soon as he could escape from the council board or audience chamber, he would run down the great staircase with its lions of gilt bronze and its steps of bright porphyry, and wander from room to room, and from corridor to corridor, like one who is seeking to find in beauty an anodyne from pain, a sort of restoration from sickness. Upon these journeys of discovery, as he would call them, and indeed they were to him real voyages through a marvelous land, he would sometimes be accompanied by the slim, fair-haired court pages, with their floating mantles and gay, fluttering ribands, but more often he would be alone, feeling through a certain quick instinct, which was almost a divination, that the secrets of art are best learned in secret, and that beauty, like wisdom, loves the lonely worshipper. Many curious stories were related to him at this period. It was said that a stout burgomaster, who had come to deliver a florid oratorical address on behalf of the citizens of the town, had caught sight of him kneeling, in real adoration, before a great picture that had just been brought from Venice, and that seemed to herald the worship of some new gods. On another occasion he had been missed for several hours, and after a lengthened search had been discovered in a little chamber in one of the northern turrets of the palace, gazing, as one in a trance, at a Greek gem carved with the figure of Adonis. He had been seen, so the tale ran, pressing his warm lips to the marble brow of an antique statue that had been discovered in the bed of the river on the occasion of the building of the stone bridge, and was inscribed with the name of the Bithynian slave of Hadrian. He had passed a whole night in noting the effect of the moonlight on a silver image of Endymion. All rare and costly materials had certainly a great fascination for him, and in his eagerness to procure them, he had sent away many merchants, some to traffic for amber with the rough fisher folk of the North Seas, some to Egypt to look for that curious green turquoise which is found only in the tombs of kings, and is said to possess magical properties, some to Persia for silken carpets and painted pottery, and others to India to buy gauze and stained ivory moonstones and bracelets of jade, sandalwood, and blue enamel, and shawls of fine wool. But what had occupied him most was the robe he was to wear at his coronation, the robe of tissued gold, and the ruby-studded crown, and the scepter with its rows and rings of pearls. Indeed, it was of this that he was thinking tonight as he lay back on his luxurious couch, watching the great pine-wood log that was burning itself out on the open hearth. The designs, which were from the hands of the most famous artist of the time, had been submitted to him many months before, and he had given orders that the artificers were to toil night and day to carry them out, and that the whole world was to be searched for jewels that would be worthy of their work. He saw himself in fancy standing at the high altar of the cathedral in the fair raiment of a king, and a smile played and lingered about his boyish lips, and lit up with a bright luster his dark woodland eyes. After some time he rose from his seat, and leaning against the carved penthouse of the chimney, looked round at the dimly lit room. The walls were hung with rich tapestries representing the triumph of beauty. A large press, hung all inlaid with agate and lapis lazuli, filled one corner, and facing the window stood a curiously wrought cabinet with lacquer panels of powdered and mosaicked gold, on which were placed some delicate goblets of Venetian glass, and a cup of dark-veined onyx. Pale poppies were broidered on the silk coverlet of the bed, as though they had fallen from the tired hands of sleep, and tall reeds of fluted ivory bare up the velvet canopy, from which great tufts of ostrich plumes sprang like a white foam to the pallid silver of the fretted ceiling. A laughing narcissus in green bronze, held a polished mirror above its head. On the table stood a flat bowl of amethyst. Outside he could see the huge dome of the cathedral looming like a bubble over the shadowy houses, and the weary sentinels pacing up and down on the misty terrace by the river. Far away in an orchard a nightingale was singing. A faint perfume of jasmine came through the open window. He brushed his brown curls back from his forehead, and taking up a lute, let his fingers stray across the chords. His heavy eyelids drooped, and a strange languor came over him. Never before had he felt so keenly, or with such exquisite joy, the magic and mystery of beautiful things. When midnight sounded from the clock tower, he touched a bell, and his pagers entered and disrobed him with much ceremony, pouring rose water over his hands and strewing flowers on his pillow. A few moments after that, they had left the room. He fell asleep. And as he slept, he dreamt a dream, and this was his dream. He thought that he was standing in a long, low attic amidst the whir and clatter of many looms. The meager daylight peered in through the grated windows and showed him the gaunt figures of the weavers bending over their cases. Pale, sickly-looking children were crouched on the huge crossbeams. As the shuttles dashed through the warp, they lifted up the heavy battens, and when the shuttles stopped, they let the battens fall and pressed the threads together. Their faces were pinched with famine, and their thin hands shook and trembled. Some haggard women were seated at a table sewing. A horrible odor filled the place. The air was foul and heavy, and the walls dripped and streamed with damp. The young king went over to one of the weavers and stood by him and watched him. And the weaver looked at him angrily and said, "Why art thou watching me? Art thou a spy set on us by our master?" "Who is thy master?" asked the young king. "Our master," cried the weaver bitterly. "He is a man like myself. Indeed, there is but this difference between us, that he wears fine clothes, while I go in rags. While I am weak from hunger, he suffers not a little from overfeeding." "The land is free," said the young king, "and thou art no man's slave." "In war," answered the weaver, "the strong make slaves of the weak, and in peace the rich make slaves of the poor. We must work to live, and they give us such mean wages that we die. We toil for them all day long, and they heap up gold in their coffers, and our children fade away before their time, and the faces of those we love become hard and evil. We tread out the grapes, and another drinks the wine. We sow the corn, and our own board is empty. We have chains, though no eye beholds them, and we are slaves, though men call us free." "Is it so with all?" he asked. "It is so with all," answered the weaver. "With the young as well as with the old, and with the women as well as with the men, with the little children as well as those who are stricken in years. The merchants grind us down, and we must needs do their bidding. The priest rides by and tells his beads, and no man has care of us. Through our sunless lanes creeps poverty, with her hungry eyes, and sin with his sodden face follows close behind her. Misery wakes us in the morning, and shame sits with us at night. But what are these things to thee? Thou art not one of us. Thy face is too happy." And he turned away, scowling, and threw the shuttle across the loom, and the young king saw that it was threaded with a thread of gold. And a great terror seized upon him, and he said to the weaver, "What robe is this that thou art weaving?" "It is the robe for the coronation of the young king," he answered. "What is that to thee?" And the young king gave a loud cry and woke, and lo, he was in his own chamber. And through the window he saw the great honey-colored moon hanging in the dusky air. And he fell asleep and dreamed again, and this was his dream. He thought that he was lying on the deck of a huge galley that was being rowed by 100 slaves. On a carpet by his side, the master of the galley was seated. He was black as ebony, and his turban was of crimson silk. Great earrings of silver dragged down the thick lobes of his ears, and in his hands he had a pair of ivory scales. The slaves were naked but for a ragged loin cloth, and each man was chained to his neighbor. The hot sun beat brightly upon them, and the negroes ran up and down the gangway and lashed them with whips of hide. They stretched out their lean arms and pulled the heavy oars through the water. The salt spray flew from the blades. At last they reached a little bay and began to take soundings. A light wind blew from the shore and covered the deck and the great lateen sail with a fine red dust. 3 Arabs, mounted on wild asses, rode out and threw spears at them. The master of the galley took a painted bow in his hand and shot one of them in the throat. He fell heavily into the surf, and his companions galloped away. A woman wrapped in yellow veil followed slowly on a camel, looking back now and then at the dead body. As soon as they had cast anchor and hauled down the sail, the negroes went into the hold and brought up a long rope ladder heavily weighted with lead. The master of the galley threw it over the side, making the ends fast to 2 iron stanchions. Then the negroes seized the youngest of the slaves and knocked his gyves off and filled his nostrils and his ears with wax and tied a big stone round his waist. He crept wearily down the ladder and disappeared into the sea. A few bubbles rose where he sank. Some other slaves peered curiously over the side. At the prow of the galley sat a shark charmer, beating monotonously upon a drum. After some time, the diver rose up out of the water and clung panting to the ladder with a pearl in his right hand. The negroes seized it from him and thrust him back. The slaves fell asleep over their oars. Again and again he came up, and each time that he did so, he brought with him a beautiful pearl. The master of the galley weighed them and put them into a little bag of green leather. The young king tried to speak, but his tongue seemed to cleave to the roof of his mouth, and his lips refused to move. The negroes chattered to each other and began to quarrel over a string of bright beads. 2 cranes flew round and round the vessel. Then the diver came up for the last time, and the pearl that he brought with him was fairer than all the pearls of Ormuz, for it was shaped like the full moon and whiter than the morning star. But his face was strangely pale, and as he fell upon the deck, the blood gushed from his ears and nostrils. He quivered for a little, and then he was still. The negroes shrugged their shoulders and threw the body overboard. And the master of the galley laughed, and reaching out, he took the pearl. And when he saw it, he pressed it to his forehead and bowed. "It shall be," he said, "for the scepter of the young king." And he made a sign to the negroes to draw up the anchor. And when the young king heard this, he gave a great cry and woke. And through the window he saw the long gray fingers of the dawn clutching at the fading stars.